Julie, thank you so much for joining us on the Rise Me Up podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So, we are talking about speaking up, sharing your voice, how to do it well. And so, why do you think speaking up is so gosh darn difficult for survivors?
Well, I think that it starts with the fact that things start in a secret keeping space. And so to speak up is a scary thing to do in the first place because you might have been inadvertently keeping a secret without realizing it. And so you have to kind of face that, which is hard to do, and start to open up with entrusted spaces. And if you're going through something very emotional and triggering and traumatizing like divorce, that can make it that much harder because you can tend to fall into some of your trauma habits, right? And the way you communicate. And then you hear yourself and you're like, I can't say this. And so it becomes scarier to do that because you don't want to make things worse.
And within an abusive relationship, you've already learned that a lot of this makes it worse.
Right. Exactly. You might be afraid of retaliation or being blamed, or maybe there are things that you have done along the way that have been reactions or responses that have been your trauma response and you're ashamed of them. There can be there's deep shame, regardless of whether you are a perpetrator or a victim or an addict or whatever. Everyone carries some deep shame for navigating these difficult circumstances. And so it's kind of like bringing out the secret and you don't know how you're going to be received.
Yeah. And not just received by your ex partner, but now you're getting a divorce. There are all these other people that are now potentially involved. So, attorneys, mediators, financial people, realtors. There's so many people that are now potentially involved, which
Right.
doubles the stress.
Right, exactly. And I heard an analogy somewhere or read it, and I can't remember what it was. And it was actually applying to dating after divorce and how you're really kind of more, if you're thinking in terms of cooking a hamburger, you're like raw meat. You're not seasoned, you're still raw. And it's hard to give shape to anything, right? And it takes time and you have to hold space for yourself and practice. It just takes time and practice. So you have to start somewhere, but it's hard to know where to start.
And hard to know who you can trust within this process. Because unfortunately, you can't trust everybody.
You can't trust everybody, and it's hard to know what is allowed, what to expect, where to turn for expertise. Sometimes we say go to our attorneys thinking that they know everything, and the reality is that they don't. They specialize in their areas and they don't know everything. And they're not therapists and they're not, So I took an unconventional approach. I come from a business background. And so I took a step back and set up my support team for divorce almost as if I was starting a business. And
Okay.
I found somebody for therapy, and I found somebody for financial advice, and I found somebody for legal advice. I happen to already be professionally trained as a mediator and have a lot of education on alternative dispute resolution and negotiation. And so I can turn to myself for that. But not that I could be a neutral in my own divorce, but I understood a lot of the process from that. That's one thing I feel like I did well was I did not look for, say, my attorney to figure out everything for me. And I felt empowered to do that because of my training and background.
Yeah. And that's actually, for all of you listening, why Julie is here with us today, because I have seen this a ton of times where, yes, you really, as a survivor, you're just coming out of this fog and you put everything in the hands of maybe your attorney or some professional within this and think they're going to get it and they're going to do the right thing. They're going to know exactly what to do because they're an attorney. And that is unfortunately not what is experienced by very many. And
Right.
so,
And
yeah, how
yeah,
can you help someone who's in that position? I guess first, know an attorney can do for you, know what mediation and what a mediator can do for you, a certified financial analyst. Like, what can these different roles do for you? And then maybe after that, how do you speak up your story to them so they'll hear you?
Yeah. So I think that one of the best things to start with is to understand. I didn't go to law school, but I work with attorneys and I work in the legal field. I'm a non lawyer legal professional. I do marketing in the legal world. And then I have shifted into, because my corporate background is client experience improvement and organizational conflict management. So I'm trained in those areas of corporate, which the legal industry tends to run about 10 years behind the corporate industry, right? So, in terms of understanding customer satisfaction and things like that, I've already been working in that. The legal field is just starting to pay attention to their clients' experiences and their journeys as clients.
I am sure
Right there.
that most people see that they have not focused
So
on the
I think
client
I
experience.
haven't spoken with a legal professional who doesn't nod their head also. They're like, "Yep, exactly." So they understand that and they're working on that, and that's something that's what I do in my work. But one of the things I think that's important to realize is that attorneys they're trained to be legal experts and to escalate matters through the court system procedurally. They might be good negotiators, but they're not always good negotiators. They're not always trained on all the subject matter that they might touch on a case, right? Whether it's financial or, there's a lot of financial stuff that goes on in courses too. They cover a lot of subject matter for a single practice area, which is family law in this instance. And attorneys tend to work in their little silos and they're very tunnel visioned. Like, this is what I do, this is what I'm focused on. And even if they're theoretically supporting settlement with their parties, where their parties reach an agreement out of court and they don't have to go to trial or go to court, they always have to have an eye on what if we end up in court. So they always have to be paying attention to a legal strategy and a litigation strategy, even if that's not going to be the outcome of a case. So what that means is they might not really be paying attention on negotiation and problem solving for their clients or listening to what their clients really need. And the flip side of that is, from the client perspective who's going through an emotional divorce, they don't know what they're allowed to ask for. They don't know what their expectations should be. And there's a big breakdown in communication that I've seen over and over again, where there's an opportunity for the expectations to be set for people who are going through divorce. Because it's so scary when you don't know what to expect. And once you file for divorce, the courts have deadlines that start, and you have to start turning things in really fast. And that gets scary feeling too. And so when I have volunteered with parties, it's to kind of slow that process down a little bit and unpack it a little bit. So I don't give legal advice, but I just say, this is kind of like a doula. Like, I sit with them through the course and I'm like, this is kind of what you can expect in terms of your journey as a client, the client experience, because that's a huge opportunity for attorneys, by the way, if any are listening. But to help them understand what the journey is going to be from here through divorce, how much it's going to cost. I mean, these aren't companies who are used to budgeting for things like litigation and whatnot. These are people's livelihoods. It's what they have built up together. And it's scary to see their financial house break up and their home house break up. And then you always have, especially on these so-called high conflict divorces, you have subject matter such as possibly abuse, not always physical abuse, emotional abuse, financial abuse, addiction. One or both parents might be abusing substances as coping mechanisms. Those are actually gray areas in divorce that the courts don't like very much and attorneys don't like very much because they're not black and white. They're not provable. And that's where I took agency in my family's divorce because of my background in training, which I'll get into, but I did not want to take gray areas and hand them to authorities to make decisions on and turn them into criminal matters and all these different things. They don't always have to go into these escalated paths. Sometimes they do need to, but sometimes problem solving and negotiation can happen. In any case, it's important to understand that attorneys are not always experts in the topics that are going to touch each divorce, right? And so when we hire attorneys, my opinion is that what I did with my attorney, he told me I was his weirdest client ever, but he loved it. Was I said, I want to not go to court. We're not going to trial. It's not going to happen. I don't want to go. That's not what's best for my family. I want to preserve our marital estate. We'll divide it up cooperatively. And I don't want to be spending money on you, frankly. Like, love you, but don't want to give you my money. And I said, so I need you to tell me what I'm allowed to ask for, what I'm allowed to expect. But I'm going to be negotiating, like, I'm the expert. My soon to be ex husband and I are the experts of each other and of our children and of our estate. And so I'm going to be negotiating with him, and I want you to keep me in the legal buoys. I just want to do something that the court will agree that, okay, you guys reach this agreement and they'll approve it. And so he said, okay. So I made it very clear from the beginning that we're high conflict, but we can reach an agreement. We can figure this out. And so that's what we did. And our mediation went terribly. And that's another thing. So mediators come and they're like Baskin Robbins, just like attorneys. They come in 31 flavors. Some come from social work backgrounds. Some are former attorneys. Some are business background people. And they are not always trained in all the stuff that they cover. And to be quite honest, because I've gone through the training and credentialing as a mediator, but I was already trained in organizational conflict management prior to my going through mediation training. And there was a lot skimmed over in the mediation training. So they don't receive a ton in the way of negotiation or a ton in the way of really specializing things. And so we ended up further apart in our mediation than we went in. And so we were going to end up in trial because mediation didn't work. So that looks like if the parties want to bicker and they don't agree, then they'll have to go to trial. And they're treated like infants a lot of times.
Yeah. I was gonna say that's common experience, right? That mediation can make things seem so much worse because you have shared some of the secrets. And so it
Right.
can blow things up. And there is a belief that mediation cannot work and settlements cannot work when there is, and we've been talking about the quote unquote high conflict divorce. If you all listen to this podcast, you know, when I think about that about 90+% of those are abuse. But yeah, how do you then stay out of trial?
Yeah. So I was trained as a mediator that if abuse, domestic violence, and or substance abuse were factors, that mediation is prohibitive and does not work. Mediation is also a required component most of the time going through family courts. So you have to go to mediation, but it's prohibitive. That doesn't make sense. And the reason I kind of colored outside of the line, Lenars, is my ex-husband and I are both negotiators by trade. We're both trained negotiators. And so when our mediation went so poorly, I reached out to him and I said, look, I'm not a neutral, but I am trained here on this stuff. And that went really terribly. That's not how I would have conducted a mediation. He said, phew, thank goodness. And I said, I can't be a neutral, but I can structure a settlement discussion with you on paper, and you and I can hammer this out and avoid trial, or else we have to go to trial and pay for that. And he said, yeah, let's do that. And so, one of the things that mediators are supposed to do, and this is what you should expect when you go to mediation, is they are supposed to help you list what the issues are to be resolved. Okay. It makes it very clear in black and white. I've seen now multiple mediators They might do the intake, but you go in and it's still like, okay, tell me what you want to do here. And it's like vomit, blah. You tell me what I'm allowed to ask for. And that's not how it works. So,
Yeah.
what worked for us was I created a very clear list of the issues that we needed to touch on, whether because they're mandatory in a divorce settlement or because they were important to us and our family. And I made a list and I said, do you have anything to add to this list? Do you agree to this list? And he said, yes. And I made it in a spreadsheet form and I gave him a column and I gave myself a column. And then I gave an agreement column. And each of our columns were our conversation spaces where we could make comments about each matter. And then once we reached a solution, I'd write it into the last column and I would change the color of the font to green. Like each one that we got through that we agreed to turned to green. And we made progress that way. And we started with the easiest to agree to and we moved to the hardest ones. And that's how we hammered out our agreement. And I handed my spreadsheet to my attorney and said, can you write this up, please, for us? And he did. And that was the way that we customized our parenting plan and divorce settlement and created a more tailored fit. Because when you go to court, they just take a chop and just chop it in half, and there's no customization. They don't care because they
Yeah.
can't, working with so many cases. And frankly, because so many cases are being escalated to court. So the courts are bogged down, right? And there are a lot of cases going to court that don't need to go to court, even high conflict cases, even cases involving some gray areas of maybe abuse or domestic violence that haven't been charged or no convictions, or maybe substance abuse that has or hasn't been demonstrated or proven, or things like that. There are all these gray areas that can be negotiated without going there in the courts. Because realistically, all that needs to happen is the divorce, which is business. It's the business of dismantling the marriage and making sure the kids are okay. So if you have a concern such as mental health or substance abuse or something like that, that's just a thing because you might have a matter that has to do with the kids, not one of the parents. It might be a child has an illness or mental illness that needs to be, like, there are all these different topics that need to be covered in each individual family. And you work with the problem. So let's say mom and or dad has an alcohol problem. So mom and or dad, whoever has the problem, they need to make a decision in the best interest of the kids that whoever has the problem agrees that there's a problem. It's a problem for someone. Someone's speaking up on it being a problem and a concern. And so it needs to be mitigated and addressed in the best interest of the child. So does mom or dad want to go get evaluated, go into treatment and recovery? Do they want to do monitored sobriety? There are all these options. And option generation is what's lacking in mediation and with attorneys. So these parents are coming to attorneys and mediators and professionals saying, I got this problem. I'm not getting anywhere. What can I do here? And they're like, I don't know, but if y'all don't agree, we're going to court,
Yeah.
you know? And
Yeah.
so
This is where, because I have a lot of different thoughts. So, one, this is where your expertise comes in, because as Julie said before, and I say all the time, you are an expert on your ex partner. You are an expert on your children. You're an expert on you, what you think will work, what you think will not work. And so, if you are listening, you're like, no, my ex will say no to literally everything. Right? Like, no to this, no to this. Any problems, if I come up with the solution, it will be a no. I still think the practice of doing some of this will benefit you even if you go to trial,
that's right.
right? So, something I see is, and this, I always say this with love, but there is a word vomiting trauma response where you all share context, like it's nobody's business, just so much context, but then there's no clarity on the concerns. And so, even if you right now, right this week, you hop off, you're done listening to this, you go, you create a spreadsheet and you can clearly articulate, these are the 10 concerns that I have that need to be mitigated. You're already further ahead than most people going through this because there's not that clarity. And an abusive, narcissistic person loves when there's no clarity, loves it. That means loopholes galore.
So that's true. And then that segues a little bit to the financial part of things because the numbers become so scary. I have
Yes.
seen attorneys make errors with the numbers quite a bit. And here's something to consider. Attorneys have a tendency, I don't mean to generalize. I know that there are some out there who are not like this, but attorneys tend to be very risk averse. And if they have made an error, that puts them at risk of exposure for ethics violations and things like that. They don't want to be called out on making errors. And I wish that I could help them understand that clients don't want to sue attorneys. They don't want to bust attorneys. They just want to preserve what they have and understand what's fair to ask for and what's within. And I have seen numbers laid out, balance sheets laid out for clients that have been done incorrectly by attorneys. And also, one of the biggest errors that I've seen by attorneys is that I am a financial, so in my training, I am actually a financial expert also. Okay, so I'm a certified divorce financial analyst. I have a finance credential on my graduate degree, and even though I have that, when I was going through divorce, all I could see was blurry. Nothing made, and I understand numbers very, very well, but it just is so traumatizing, just with or without conflict or other factors. It's just a very traumatizing experience. And all I could see was black. And my attorney could have done a better job of presenting numbers in front of me slowly, let me see everything clearly. But instead, it felt like, all right, these are the numbers. Do you agree? And I was like, wait, wait, wait. I need to understand how these numbers look. Is this fair here? Is this how it's supposed to look? And I wanted to go through analytically. And I did not feel that I was given the time to do that. And not only that, but in cases that I've assisted on since then, I've seen a lot of errors. And that is an opportunity that both attorneys have to kind of slow the roll for their clients, help them understand where they stand and what things look like, understand that their head's in a trauma space. And so even if they're an expert on numbers, they're not seeing the numbers very well and they need help. But from people who are going through divorce, they might want to turn to like a CDFA, a certified divorce financial analyst, somebody who specializes in numbers to help them, not just with understanding the numbers, but part of going through divorce is having to turn in the worst homework assignment ever in your whole life, to have to assemble all
Yeah.
of your finances. And then sometimes if there's ongoing conflict, you have to assemble them multiple times and keep reassembling them. And it is exhausting. And so someone like a CDFA can help you prepare your financial disclosures. They can work as a neutral and help them prepare their financial disclosures, often for less hourly than an attorney charges and
Yeah.
more accurately. They're looking forward, they're helping you with building your budget, building your spending plan, understanding what your needs are going to be. And it's a more empowering process for the couple or the parties if they're having individually.
I assume that a financial analyst is going to cost less for doing a better job.
Right.
So, right. And as we talk about speaking up within this, you don't have to share all of the details of your abuse with your financial analyst, right? Your attorney needs to know more. A financial analyst doesn't need to know as much. They need to look at your numbers. And it might help to give them this much context, just like a little bit of context of why you're so fearful or why you have no clue about the money because you've never had access to it or something like that. But speaking up in that case can be a lot smoother and easier.
Yes. Now, I will add here that sometimes attorneys are resistant to working with non lawyer legal professionals like CDFAs. Sometimes attorneys are resistant to working with mediators. They understand that it's a checkbox on the way to trial, but they will often step back and not assist with the negotiation process and the settlement discussion and say, okay, I'll go in and see if you can figure it out. When that doesn't work out, we'll go on to trial. I'll keep on my legal strategy over here. And there's some opportunity there for attorneys to understand a few things that mediators are really supposed to be there to assist with negotiation. And I'm even going to add this in that I know a lot of attorneys who don't practice in the area of family law, but they've had to navigate their own divorces. And they're like, oh my gosh, this is the worst thing I've ever experienced. It's even hard and confusing for attorneys who get divorced. They go through the same client journey that we do as non lawyers who are trying to figure it out. And they are just as befuddled by it. So we have to remember that the mediator is there to help negotiate a settlement. So when you talk to the mediator, your attorney really should be helping you do this. If you have an attorney, you should be going into mediation with very specific things that you want to resolve with your ex or soon to be ex so that you can put it into a settlement and not go to court or go to court on just a few matters instead of all the matters. I had a friend
Yeah.
who her divorce the same month as me, and we were divorced within 6 months, and she and her ex, a year and a half later, were still not divorced because they were not able to reach settlement out of court. And we had similar cases, but the reality is that court can exacerbate some of these circumstances and make them worse inadvertently because they're not comfortable with the subject matter,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, they're not comfortable, they don't fully understand, they have to get through cases, and so you talked about it before, but that cookie cutter approach to let's talk about parenting plans. That cookie cutter approach that your attorney might use, that the court is gonna use, because they're like, "Well, this works okay. This works for this case I had this morning, so we're gonna do the same thing." That makes it where it is a crapshoot, right? We're always like, "Who's the judge? How do they
And that
rule?"
that cookie cutter approach is true. Like, a lot of times they will cut and paste the same language from, one parenting plan to another. That was another thing that my attorney joked with me about because he said, "Wow, I'm spending a lot of hours drafting this document." I was like, "Oh, that sounds expensive." And he said, "Yeah, but it's a lot cheaper than going to court. So you did a good job." He said, "It's very comprehensive." And he said, "I am not using a single canned sentence in this draft. I'm writing everything from scratch." And so it's important to understand. I mean, I've seen documents where they cut and pasted from another document and forget to change name, or things like that. And so it's very dehumanizing when you see your family's plan that is going to go out there and it has kids from another family named in it. And you're like, is anybody paying attention? These are my kids. So even if a situation is so-called high conflict, even if I'm going to offer this, I'm going to say it. It's not conventional, but even if there's abuse or addiction or things like that, I don't think that it's always prohibitive. I think that in some of these cases, it's better to settle out of court than to go to court. And if you've got an abusive ex or some kind of problem like that, you don't wanna stay entangled with that, right? You wanna go ahead and just negotiate. It's like my father was a big business guy, and he was abusive, and he did a lot of bad things. He did some crooked things. He was even convicted. And at some point, how much do you wanna stay involved in that and tangled up in that? I mean, a settlement discussion is an opportunity to provide yourself with some protective distance and some secure space for you and your kids, like a sanctuary for that. And I think that there's so much opportunity. And it also is an opportunity for someone who is struggling. And sometimes the person who's struggling is a victim, right? But struggling with something like addiction or substance abuse or mental illness or things like that. Because you know what? Abuse gives you brain damage, in my opinion. And so if you're struggling, it's really hard to show up in an empowered way if you are sitting there prepared to go to court to defend your credibility and your sanity. And so I think that there's so much opportunity if you're able to do it and be pretty careful about who you choose and be willing to change professionals if you are not signed up with the right attorney or if mediation is going down the tubes, say, hey, you know what? This is not working. We can try again tomorrow if you want to, but This mediation is not going anywhere. Don't keep spending money for a full day mediation that an hour in, is not going
Isn't
anywhere. Right? So, yeah.
I was gonna say, so what are some language that our audience listening can use as they are searching for the right attorney, or maybe they have an attorney they feel fairly comfortable with, but they are really like, okay, so we're gonna try this, but we're planning for court. We're planning for trial. We're planning for this. What's some language that they can use to bring about potentially looking at problems in a different way?
Say when I interviewed, I'm trying to think back because it's been several years now, but when I interviewed my attorney, I told him that I don't want to go to trial. I said, I'm the product of a really ugly divorce. And I saw what it did and I saw how long it can last, and I don't want to go to trial. So I would like to find every single opportunity possible, understanding that I might not get a choice in the matter. I want to settle out of court. So when you become really clear about things you do want, that helps you with vetting who you're hiring. The other thing that I would say is there's a slippery slope with filing for divorce because, for instance, my mom will say that she filed for divorce hoping to give my dad a wake up call and hoping that he would turn around and wake up and change and get better and everything. And it just got worse from there because, as we know, domestic violence situations, when separation starts to happen, that's when abuse can increase and escalate. And we did it. And I got to see all that as a teenager, and my sister got to see all that as a teenager. And so think about what you're doing and why. If you're filing for divorce, are you ready to leave? Are you ready to follow through? Understand that a good thing and a bad thing happens when you file for divorce. One is that the clock starts ticking and you have to start giving deliverables. So my recommendation is to get all of your ducks in a row first, so that you can go into it from a calmer place and understand what it is that you want to do. Because once you file, it starts the clock ticking. The other side of that is if you don't file and you have things on your case, such as repeat DUIs by your ex. Well, if your ex is out there drinking and driving, then they're putting you at risk for liability for if he kills somebody, right?
Mhm.
Or hurts somebody. And so that's something where an attorney can be helpful because, like, what's my liability risk here? Understanding what your liability risk is. Or if they're spending money secretly, if you don't go ahead and file for divorce and you know about it, then you might lose some opportunities to mitigate those losses to your portion of the marital estate. So those are places that you definitely want an attorney's input if you can get it. If you, from a budgeting standpoint, can't retain an attorney, some attorneys will consult and you can just pay an hourly for a
Mhm.
consultation and you can still get prepared and get your ducks in a row before you file. Another thing is when I interned as a mediator and CDFA, I specifically picked a mediator for I went through because I said, I've seen mediators do things not the way I would do them. I'm going to go find one who does mediation the way I would do mediation, and I want to learn from that person. So I got to sit in with this mediator and CDFA and see how she went about it. And the way that she did it was she took down all the topics just like I do, what just like I did in our divorce, and all the issues to be resolved, and she prepared the financials for the couple to turn into the court, the financial disclosures that you have to turn into the court. She prepared those for the couple so that they didn't have to do that stressful homework assignment.
Mhm.
And then, as part of the mediation, she would present those to them. But she would have the couple wait to file for divorce. And she would have them agree on the front end, like, we're not going to take out debt. We're not going to spend money. We're not going to do anything. She had an agreement that they agreed to first. And then she would help them reach agreement on what they could first. And she would go ahead and construct their documents, their settlement documents. So, in cases where that went along well, they did it and then they filed the documents and then they were divorced 91 days later, right? They
Mhm.
didn't go to trial. So that's a great way to do it if you can start with a mediator find one who understands marital estates, find one who understands parenting plans and how to construct those without those gaps and loopholes and things like that.
Yeah.
And find one who's going to really hold boundaries with the couple and maintain safe space, right? So that an agreement is able to be negotiated.
Yeah. And I was thinking as a going back of making sure that you are very clear on these are the areas that we need to figure out and settle on and be super clear with that with the mediation. And so as you're asking your questions to these mediators or attorneys, you can ask the questions of what is your take on parenting plans based on our family situation? We are going to need a custom parenting plan. How do you help provide that customization for the families you work with?
That's
So if
right. And
you're asking a mediator, it's questions something like that, or an attorney, like that might be a question rather than I'm divorcing a narcissist and he's so abusive and I don't know what to do and he can't have 50-50 and da da da, right? Like that whole, again, say this with love. If you go in saying, I know that I will need a customized plan based on our situation, you don't have to tell them the situation yet. They're going to learn when you show up and they get to feel that. That might be a good question.
that's right. And maybe ask them, okay, if I have this concern for my kids and this is what I'm scared of, or if I have this concern about our financials and this is what I'm scared of, can you run me through some scenarios that might be some solutions to this type of matter on my case that's individual to my case? Another thing that I will offer here that I meant to say earlier was that there's a lot of wide open space from filing for divorce to trial that is so much opportunity for problem solving with a couple and creating solutions and customizing solutions, which is what I was mentioning. And I don't mind using this example from my divorce. I try to respect everybody's privacy, but this was kind of funny because my ex husband had never owned guns before. He wasn't a gun shooter guy, but he inherited his dad's guns when he died. And I took them and I put them in a fireproof safe because I didn't like guns.
Mhm.
I didn't want guns. And and that became something to fight over because it was just a simple, it was just a thing. If we're going to be fighting, let's fight over everything kind of thing. And I said, no, I want a gun safe and I want you to take a gun safety class. And that's what I want. And my attorney told me, you can't do that. That is his personal property. You're not allowed to do that. If you go to court, the judge will tell you you have to give him his guns. And I said,
Mhm.
cool, but we have young kids. And I think that what I'm asking for is something that he would agree to. It's a reasonable thing to ask for. And I'd rather ask for that first. Do we have to just automatically do whatever the court's going to tell me to do 6 months from now? Or can we first ask for what I want here? Because I think that he would agree that this is safer for the kids if we do it this way. And so we did that and he agreed. So that's an example of a matter that can be agreed upon that doesn't necessarily align with what the court would order, right?
Yeah.
But that does put the kids first.
Yeah. And so I think, again, if you're thinking there's no way my ex will, on certain things, you might have to go to court.
Right.
And there are certain things that in that time period that you can figure out and settle beforehand. I'm thinking if your ex partner is someone who money is really important to them and they don't want to spend $100,000 on attorneys, that might be their buy in to doing more of the settling, right? If they don't want their secrets aired out in front of people that would be public, then a settlement might be more the way to go. And again, you might be settling on half of the things, and then you have to go to court for the other half of the things.
Exactly. You start with those easier ones first, usually. To
Yeah.
agree.
And so seeing what you can get done. And so as we are wrapping up, I wanted to bring up that Julie is actually, as a trained negotiator, is going to be teaching a workshop for us in the Rising Beyond community, you all are invited to this workshop. All the information is going to be in the show notes, like the link to register is going to be in the show notes below. It is The Secret to Speaking Up: Practical Strategies of Negotiation During Post Separation Abuse. So if you are like, okay, so I would really like some of this, or I'm a divorce coach, or I want to find a way to help people in this arena, learning the skills of negotiation, you will be further along than everybody else. So I just wanted to put that out there, that that is happening in a couple weeks, I guess a week and a half, Thursday, the 15th of November, if you're listening to this at the time it goes live. And so learning those negotiation tactics, that is honestly what was extremely helpful for Julie in her situation.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to doing that. Yeah. And
Yeah.
did give our family some relief, I think. So hopefully we can get some other people some relief.
Yeah, absolutely. So are there any final words or final things that you would like to leave our audience with as they kind of think about the possibility of settling?
I think just remember that when you have kids and you are dealing with your pediatrician, I remember hearing from every single pediatrician, mother knows best, or you are the expert of your kids and things like that. And whether you're mom or dad, you're the expert of your family. It's your family, and you retain more agency and power when you create solutions outside of court. Court is kind of a last resort if you can't reach agreement on things. So when you're talking with your attorneys or any kind of specialist, if you say, I really want to do this, and task them with supporting you in that.
Yeah. And that they work for you.
That's
It
right.
may
Yeah.
not seem that way. It may not feel that way depending on your relationship with your attorney, but that is the truth, is that they work for you. So if you are asking, like, I would really like to stay as far out of court as possible, can we work towards that goal? Knowing it's a possibility. I'm not, I'm not putting that out completely out of my mind, but let's work towards this way first and see where we can get.
That's
Um,
right.
and I think too, an aside or a benefit of doing that too is then your attorney will get to learn your ex,
That's true too.
because as you are attempting to negotiate and as they are attempting to negotiate, they will get a sense of who your ex is so that they can then better plan for if they have to go to trial. So I think that's just like an additional benefit that just popped into my brain.
Well, and you can create a record of demonstrating being cooperative and seeking to be cooperative.
Yes. Yes. That you are the one that is trying to figure this out. You are the one that is trying to co-parent. You are the one that is trying to just really focus on what's in the child's best interests. And that does go a long way for a lot of judges. So,
Yeah. Thank you
well,
for having me.
yeah, I appreciate you being here. And for those of you listening, if you have any questions for Julie, you can reach out to me directly and I will make sure I can connect the two of you. info@risingbeyondpc.com. I always read my emails, and we will catch you on the next episode of the Rising Beyond podcast and hope to see you at the training on the 14th.
Thank you.